In 1893, a pilgrim steamship reached a small Ottoman island at the entrance to the Red Sea. One passenger had died during the voyage. The ship's physician wrote down the cause: dysentery. The pilgrims were allowed to land without special precautions. But the declaration was false. According to a contemporary sanitary report, the dead passenger had shown cholera, and the physician had concealed it. Within hours, the disease appeared among the people ashore. 34 cases were registered, 25 people died. And the island that received them was supposed to be the barrier protecting the road to Mecca. In this film, we will reopen the forgotten file of Kamaran, the Ottoman quarantine island that every pilgrim ship arriving from the Indian Ocean could be forced to face before reaching Jeddah. Why was an isolated island turned into one of the largest quarantine stations of its age? What actually happened to pilgrims after they stepped ashore? Why were British officials watching an Ottoman medical station so closely? And when cholera passed through the barrier, who carried the blame? To understand that hidden death certificate, we first need to understand the new world created by steam. Dark past. We reopen the files that history never fully closed. For centuries, the journey to Mecca was measured in months. Pilgrims crossed deserts in caravans, or moved slowly between ports in sailing vessels. Then steamships transformed the route. Thousands of people could now travel from Bombay, Calcutta, Southeast Asia, and the Persian Gulf toward the Red Sea in a single season. The pilgrimage became faster, cheaper, and accessible to more Muslims than before. But steam carried something else with equal efficiency. An infected passenger could leave one port, cross an ocean, and reach another population before officials even understood where the outbreak had begun. The same network that connected believers also connected epidemics. In 1865, cholera tore through the pilgrimage and moved beyond the Hejaz. The disaster intensified European fears that disease could travel from South Asia through the Red Sea and into Mediterranean ports. Those fears were medical, but not only medical. Closing a port could halt trade. Detaining a ship could cost its owner money. Accusing one empire of failing to control disease could justify another empire's intervention. Public health had become international politics. The question was no longer simply how to treat the sick. The question was, who had the power to stop a ship, inspect its passengers, and decide when it could move again? In 1866, delegates gathered in Constantinople for an international sanitary conference. They treated India as the source region of the recent cholera pandemic and argued that pilgrims entering the Red Sea from the Indian Ocean should be examined before they reached the Hejaz. The Ottoman Empire was entrusted with establishing a quarantine station near the southern entrance of the Red Sea. An Ottoman commission surveyed possible locations. The chosen site was Kamaran, an island off Yemen, positioned close to the shipping channel leading north toward Jeddah. Geography had turned a dry island into a gate. Kamaran offered 3 advantages. First, ships arriving from the Indian Ocean could be intercepted near Bab al-Mandab before they entered the long corridor of the Red Sea. Second, the water around the island separated potentially infected passengers from mainland communities. Third, its terrain allowed officials to divide large groups into separate quarantine sections. Yet isolation created its own danger. Every bed, water tank, medicine chest, and message had to reach the island by sea. Kamaran was ideal for confinement, precisely because it was difficult to supply. Kamaran entered the Ottoman quarantine system in 1881. A permanent station began operating in the early 1880s. This was not a distant clinic with a single doctor. The empire planned quarantine divisions, hospitals, disinfection buildings, landing jetties, barracks, police posts, offices, and shelters for thousands of travelers. Ottoman records also show efforts to turn Kamaran and nearby Salif into a stronger administrative district. The message was clear. Inspecting pilgrims here was not only a health service, it was an exercise of sovereignty. The Ottoman state was placing a medical border across one of the most important religious routes in the world. During pilgrimage season, Kamaran became a temporary city. Doctors examined passengers. Clerks copied names and ship details. Guards maintained separation between groups. Boatmen moved people and supplies. Disinfection workers handled clothing, luggage, and contaminated spaces. Interpreters worked among travelers speaking languages from across Asia and the Middle East. Some years brought roughly 20,000 people through the station. Exceptional seasons brought far more. For the pilgrims, however, Kamaran was not their destination. Mecca was ahead of them. But first came inspection, uncertainty, and waiting. Procedures changed according to the year and the condition of each ship, but the logic remained consistent. Officials examined the vessel's health declaration. Passengers could be landed and divided into smaller groups. Suspected patients were isolated. Clothing, personal belongings, and parts of the ship could be disinfected. If no new case appeared during the required period, the ship could continue toward Jeddah and another inspection. On paper, the system created layers of protection. In practice, protection depended on accurate reports, clean water, working equipment, sufficient buildings, and enough time. If only one of those layers failed, thousands of people could be exposed. Between January and June of 1893, 43 steamships and 2 sailing vessels reached Kamaran. The station received 31,788 pilgrims. They had traveled from Bombay, Calcutta, the Dutch East Indies, Malayan ports, the Persian Gulf, Aden, Hodeidah, and Bahrain. More than 28,000 had arrived aboard British steamships. Every vessel brought a new crowd, a new set of documents, and a new medical calculation. Some passengers had already died at sea. Then the Knight of St. John approached the island. One pilgrim had died during the voyage. The ship's physician declared that the cause was dysentery. The surviving report makes a far more serious accusation. The physician knew the case was cholera and concealed it. We do not know his motive. The surviving evidence does not prove bribery, panic, or a wider conspiracy. What it does record is the consequence of the declaration. Because the death was not treated as cholera, the pilgrims were landed without the special precautions that an infected ship required. The barrier opened on the strength of one word. A few hours after the passengers landed, cholera appeared among them. The station registered 34 cases. 25 people died. The same report describes disinfection with chemical solutions and the removal of the upper layer of contaminated soil from areas used by the pilgrims. Doctors, guards, and workers now had to contain an outbreak inside the quarantine station itself. Kamaran had been built to keep disease outside the Hejaz. But a quarantine island is not a wall. It is a chain of human decisions, and on this occasion, the first link was a false diagnosis. Cholera was not the only danger recorded during that season. The report listed 115 deaths among pilgrims during their stay at Kamaran. 25 were attributed to cholera. The remaining deaths included smallpox, fever, pneumonia, dysentery, tuberculosis, old age, and other illnesses. These figures must be read carefully. They do not tell us that Kamaran caused every death. Many travelers arrived exhausted or already ill after crowded sea journeys. But they do show what the island had become: a place where mass travel, fragile bodies, and limited infrastructure met under extreme pressure. The pilgrims and even Kamaran's officials complained about the water. A contemporary report described it as dirty and brackish. On an island holding thousands of people, water was not a minor comfort. It was the foundation of drinking, washing, disinfection, and survival. British observers repeatedly pressed for improvements. Ottoman authorities invested in buildings and administration, yet reports still described shortages, delays, and incomplete facilities. This is the contradiction at the center of Kamaran. It was designed as a modern defense against disease, but it operated at the edge of an empire, where every missing pipe or delayed shipment could become a medical threat. Detention was not always the same. The 1893 records include periods ranging from 24 hours to 31 days. The decision depended on the ship's route, the suspected disease, and the appearance of new cases. Later international regulations commonly required infected groups to remain for several days after the last danger point, with patients isolated and belongings disinfected. For a healthy pilgrim, the logic could feel cruel. Freedom depended on whether someone else in the group became sick. One new case could restart the clock. At Kamaran, time itself became a medical instrument. Britain's interest in Kamaran was unavoidable. British India supplied a vast number of pilgrims. British companies carried many of them. British-controlled routes connected Bombay, Aden, and Suez. An outbreak threatened lives, but quarantine also threatened schedules, shipping revenue, and imperial communication. British doctors and diplomats therefore examined Ottoman reports, demanded improvements, and challenged procedures they considered inadequate. The concern was real, but it was never politically neutral. The empire that controlled the ships wanted influence over the island that could stop them. In 1894, Kamaran's management faced severe criticism at the International Sanitary Conference in Paris. Foreign governments wanted a greater voice in the conditions imposed on their subjects traveling to Mecca. The Ottoman government did not sign the resulting convention. Instead, it promised to improve Kamaran and the health system of the Hejaz. This was more than a technical dispute. Accepting international supervision could improve standards, but it could also weaken Ottoman authority over its own territory and over the pilgrimage routes of the Caliphate. Medicine had become a negotiation over sovereignty. The station continued to expand, but its design did not always match reality. In 1898, international health delegates warned that some divisions intended for infected arrivals lacked their own jetty and disinfection pavilion. This meant infected pilgrims could be forced to move through parts of the camp used by healthy groups. Officials demanded immediate construction. They debated plans, budgets, and engineering reports, while plague was spreading in India and another pilgrimage season approached. Kamaran was not a failed idea. It was a vast machine being rebuilt, while thousands of people were already passing through it. Ottoman documents record ambitious efforts: new quarantine divisions, hospitals, barracks, a government office, gendarmerie posts, jetties, and disinfection buildings. Warships were assigned to maintain order. A telegraph connection to the mainland was repeatedly requested, so that urgent messages would no longer depend on irregular post. The island was promoted from remote outpost to administrative center. Each building carried two meanings. It was infrastructure for protecting life, and it was evidence that the Ottoman flag still commanded this corner of the Red Sea. In the exceptional pilgrimage season of 1899, 44,333 pilgrims from India and the Far East arrived at Kamaran over 5 months. Imagine the scale: ships waiting offshore, clerks processing documents, families searching for shelter, doctors watching for symptoms, and entire camp divisions counting the days since the last suspicious case. Kamaran was no longer merely a quarantine station. It was a seasonal city built around one question: who was safe to continue toward Mecca? When cholera appeared in the Hejaz, blame traveled almost as quickly as the disease. In 1911, the Emir of Mecca accused personnel at Kamaran and Jeddah of allowing cholera to enter the holy region. The Ottoman Board of Health rejected the allegation. The surviving exchange does not settle every medical fact, but it reveals the political stakes. An outbreak could discredit a doctor, a governor, the Emir, the Board of Health, or the empire itself. No authority wanted to own the failure. Everyone wanted control of the report. In 1915, during the First World War, British forces occupied Kamaran. Ottoman operational control of the island ended. The quarantine station continued under later administrations and international agreements, but the Ottoman experiment was over. Its verdict is not simple. Kamaran was a shield against epidemic disease. It was also a checkpoint controlling the movement of believers. It represented scientific cooperation and imperial surveillance. It could save travelers from exposure, yet its own shortages could place them at risk. The island stood at the point where medicine, faith, commerce, and power became impossible to separate. So what was Kamaran above all? A necessary shield against disease, or an imperial system for controlling movement? Write your verdict in the comments. If you want us to reopen more forgotten files like this one, like the video, subscribe to Dark Past, and follow us at Dark Past channel.